research fellow and lecturer in English language and translation at the University of Torino, Italy, where she teaches translation and directs the MA program in audiovisual translation. Her main research interests are audiovisual translation, the dubbing of animated films and of multilingual films, the influence of English languages on dubbed Italian, and audio description and accessibility, the translation of humor, theater translation, film adaptation, and the Shakespeare translation. Her publications include the monographs, Recreating Language Identities in Animated Films, Dubbing Linguistic Variety, and Reclaiming Romeo and Juliet, Italian translations for page, stage, and screen. Today, the title of her keynote speech is Recreating Language Identities in Animated Film. Let's welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this presentation and for inviting me. Okay, good morning. Well, good afternoon to you, and good morning, everyone, for the people who are in Europe. Thank you. I'll try to share my presentation. Okay. Okay. Can you see it? I hope.
Yes, very clear.
That's it. Okay. Okay. So thank you very much. Yes, this presentation, this paper is basically a kind of summary of my journey to reach to write the book Recreating Language Identities in Animated Films, Dubbing Linguistic Variation. And I would like to explain to you first of all what my aim was, how I decided to write this book, and what I found out basically, and what my methodology was. So the aim was, at some point, I was always interested in in animated films because I think that, because they're very popular audiovisual products, which are dubbed all over the world, which are watched by, yes, they have as main audience children, but they're watched by families and also by adults. And I'm sure that everyone, each of us, has in mind an animated film they watched maybe when they were kids, and they may even remember some lines. So they're popular products which are aimed at a double audience, because they also contain elements for adults. So they contain humor, they contain double meanings, they contain cultural references. So they are they have plenty of material which is interesting from the point of view of someone like me who's interested in language, in translation, and in culture. So I decided to explore, also with my students, the representation of language variation in some recent animated films. Language variation is important. The way in which characters speak is meaningful. When animated films are voiced by voice talents are often chosen among famous stars. And sometimes, often, they are asked to put on a specific accent to provide characterization. And also the way in which characters speak may affect the way in which people and kids in particular think about the world, and about people, and about different nationalities, and about different ethnicities. So that was the main reason why I was interested in analyzing animated films and language variation. So I chose some recent animated films, feature films, produced by US majors, and they had to be in English, so American US majors. I wanted to explore the way in which characters speak, so how linguistic identities are created in these films. And I wanted to explore the dubbing process and its agents. So how are these products translated, adapted, and dubbed in Italy? I had a basic idea of what happened, but then as I delved into the issue and as I met dubbing professionals and I saw some dubbing sessions, then I realized how complex, even more complex than I expected the process was. And then I wanted to analyze the strategies adopted by Italian dubbing professionals to deal with multilingualism, with language varieties, with the presence of accents and the presence of different accents. I focused on native and non-native varieties of English. I decided while I was analyzing these films that a useful distinction was to divide varieties into native varieties, so varieties where spoken English, spoken by native speakers, Americans, British, Australians, Scottish people, etc., and varieties spoken by non-native speakers of English, so foreign accented English. It's also called foreign accented English. And also the presence of languages other than English, so the presence of foreign languages, so French, Italian, Russian, Japanese, and other languages, and also the use of regional Italian or dialects in dubbing. So when it came to analyzing the dub version, I also wanted to see whether in Italian dubbing, regional Italian or dialects, which are specific areas, regions of Italy, were used in dubbing, because usually in dubbing, Italian dubbing uses standard Italian, which doesn't tell us where the speaker comes from. So as far as the data and procedures are concerned, I analyzed these animated films produced between 2001 and 2017. I interviewed some Italian dubbing professionals, and these interviews took place between 2015 and 2020. Well, also some months ago, and I keep talking to dubbing professionals. So there were personal conversations, basically, in which either through email or telephone or face-to-face, which I asked them questions. And we talked about the dubbing process, the language of dubbing, their approach to multilingualism, so what they thought of how they dealt with the presence of more than one language in film dialogue, the presence of languages, linguistic variation, what they thought about the use of accents in dubbing, the use of regional accents in dubbing, the presence of specific accents in the original version, and what they thought about the use of regional Italian or Italian dialects in dubbing. I transcribed, together with my students, the films. I selected the films, I transcribed the films with the help of my students. I provided a linguistic analysis of the parts which I thought were interesting from the point of view of my research questions. So what I was interested in, language variation, multilingualism, etc. And I conducted personal communications with these dubbing professionals. The films I analyzed were, in the end, were 37 animated films. I had more, but then I selected 37 produced in the 21st century. Produced by DreamWorks, Disney, Disney Animation, Pixar, Touchstone Pictures, Sony Pictures, Illumination Entertainment, 20th Century Fox, Paramount, Universal. The reason is that there are studies. There are several studies conducted on Disney films, and my point of departure was the chapter of a book by Rosina Lippi Green, teaching children how to discriminate, in which she talks about the use of stereotypes, the presence of language varieties, the fact that animated films have present stereotypes which may be dangerous, obviously, for children. And she had analyzed animated films. She had focused on animated films. I wanted to see whether what her conclusions were actually also valid for other production companies. Where are there patterns which are part of the way in which cinema in general and products, so the visual products, and maybe Hollywood presents other nationalities, ethnicities, or even people within their own country. So are there patterns which are used in characterization, stereotypes which are used in characterization in animated films produced in the US? So that's why I analyzed other films produced by other majors as well. Some of the films, but not all of them, obviously. The Shrek tetralogy, the Madagascar films, Rise of the Guardians, Mr. Peabody and Sherman, Despicable Me, and then by Disney, Atlantis, The Wild, Cars, the Cars films, Toy Story 3, Zootopia. Okay, Toy Story 3, just Toy Story 3. Why? Because it contains a part in which one of the characters starts speaking Spanish. So that was interesting from my point of view. Ratatouille is set in France, and they use some French words and have a French accent. Zootopia, because there is Mr. Big, who is a kind of mobster, and it's a kind of allusion to The Godfather. Coco, because it's set in Mexico. Rango, because of course, okay, Rango is an example. I hadn't selected Rango. I had never seen Rango. But then talking with Fiamma Izzo, dubbing director and dialogue writer, she told me about this film. She said, I dubbed this film, and it's interesting because it's set in the Wild Wild West, and there are characters who also speak with some Spanish. So that could be interesting for your research. And then I researched Rango, Hotel Transylvania, and Romeo and Juliet. Well, basically the whole story started when I did some research on Romeo and Juliet, which is a comic animated version of Romeo and Juliet with garden gnomes as protagonists. And I interviewed the dubbing director, dialogue writer, and the actors, the dubbing actors, and then I got to know also the Disney Character Voices International creative director. Okay, so these are some images from the films, so some drawings. Mr. Peabody and Sherman, they travel across time and space, and they go to Italy, and they meet Leonardo and Mona Lisa, and they also go to France during the French Revolution, and they meet Marie Antoinette. Ratatouille is a chef, and it's set in Paris. Cars, this is one of the cars who speaks Italian, or they speak some Italian accented English, and this is Gru from Despicable Me, who speaks in the original version with a kind of Eastern, a contrived Eastern European accent. and which provides a comic characterization. And this is the character in Toy Story who starts speaking Spanish. So what are the functions of multilingualism or the presence of languages other than English? Yes, by multilingualism, I mean languages, the presence of languages other than English, the presence of language varieties other than the main language variety spoken in a film, or the presence of foreign accented English in films. Multilingualism can have various functions. One is characterization, quick character portrayal. Also the creation of stereotypes, but language varieties can also convey humor, so they have a comic function. If a character speaks with a marked French accent, for instance, he or she may appear comic, humorous. But the presence of a specific language or accent or some words can also provide setting through evocation or postcarding or audio postcarding as well, defined it, and also was also used by Jacintas. The use of the peppering of some foreign words suggests that the characters would be speaking another language. So we hear characters speak English, but since they have maybe an accent or they use a few foreign words, this tells us that we are in a country where that language would be spoken, but since the convention is that and the film is in English, then they all speak English. And multilingualism also provides contrast. So if we hear a character with an accent, this tells us that he or she is other. So it provides linguistic differentiation. And these are some references about multilingualism in animated films, and there are several studies devoted to this in audiovisual translation. Language, as Lippy Green points out, language is used as an efficient and quick way to build character and reaffirm stereotypes. So this is what Disney does, but also Hollywood film do. And in Disney films, Di Giovanni points out that visual and verbal stereotypes are employed to narrate otherness. There is obviously, since we're talking about audiovisual products, there is a combination of visual stereotypes and verbal stereotypes. Okay, visual stereotypes, think of Italy, and then if you see a pizza or pasta or spaghetti bolognese, then it's Italy. Then we're Italian, right? If you see a Vespa, as I saw yesterday, the latest Disney Pixar animated film was released on Disney Plus, and I didn't have time to watch it, but I saw just a few minutes, and it's set in Italy, in around Liguria, and there is a Vespa. So animated films do use stereotypes, both verbal, so language elements, and visual. Otherness, therefore is conveyed through stereotypes, and we find stereotypes of the French, of Italians, of the Brits. For instance, just briefly, the French are often associated with food preparation, so they're chefs, cooks, etc., waiters, but they are also sensual rascals. They are irascible. And Plancheneau, in a book about French images of the French in the media, she talks about the emblematic rudeness of the French. They are ill-tempered. And in Ratatouille, Colette at some point, Colette is the female chef, she says, "We hate to be rude, but we're French." And this is an obvious joke made by the American filmmakers about the French. And then they also make jokes about Canadian people. their neighbors, or about Mexicans. Italians, how were Italians portrayed, or Italian Americans? Italian Americans are obviously all associated with mafia, but they may be immigrants, boxers, Latin lovers, mobsters. So there are stereotypes associated with Italians, and Italians, if they're not Italian American, but they are simply Italian, then obviously there is something relating to the close bond with family and the importance of food, and them being Latin lovers. And we have stereotypes of all nationalities and ethnic groups. Latinos, according to Hollywood, Latinos are depicted stereotypically as bandits, harlots, Latin lovers. They're passionate food sellers, taco sellers, or dancers. And again, there are visual and verbal stereotypes. You can find them in Despicable Me 2 in the character of Eduardo Perez. And what about Spanish people? Obviously, there will be some bullfighting, and they will dance flamenco, etc. The Brits tend to be evil. The villain is often British. So I play this game with my kids, and we say, okay, we watch a film or a TV series, and we hear someone speaking British English, and we say, I guess this is the evil character. And they're often, Zabalbescoa and other scholars have pointed out that, and also Ansato, that villains are often British. If you think of Scar in The Lion King, then he has a British accent, and more specifically a refined British accent. So received pronunciation is associated with being evil. But Rojek also talks about the conviction of innate superiority that the British have, and emotional frigidity. But the British can be posh, rich, or aristocratic, or butlers, as Aranzato also points out in a recent article. Regarding language variation in dubbing, language variation has been, this is a comment by Chiaro, is possibly the most difficult feature affecting the quality of screen translation. It is difficult to convey it in dubbing, and obviously in subtitling, but I'm focusing on dubbing here because these films are dubbed. The translational norm in Italy, so what usually happens is that a common strategy to deal with variation, according to Chiaro, is not to deal with it. So to homogenize everything into a standard Italian, the mainstream variety of the target language, which is a language that nobody speaks, because nobody speaks the language that dubbing uses. Dubbing actors, when they go into the dubbing studio and they start recording their lines, they completely change their Italian. There is no trace of regional accent, because they're trained to do that. They're trained to use a language which is devoid of any regional accent. And what Morville told me once was that we would never hear a regional accent in dubbing unless it's something or an accent or a foreign accent, unless it's something which is meaningful, unless it's something which was decided by the dubbing team, by the dubbing director, and because it conveys specific features. So the polyphony of the original, we have an original film in which each character have a specific accent, a specific voice, and speaks a specific variety of English or other languages, and these tends to be reduced into standard Italian. As I said, standard Italian, the language of dubbing is a neutral language. And they should use proper diction. So there is, according to Chiaro, but also Pavesi and to several studies, a homogenizing norm. There is a leveling out of variation. However, I would say that there is this tendency to convey and emphasize variation if the speaker is a non-native speaker. So if we have foreign accents in the original version, a character who's represented as being foreign, then that character will probably be represented as being foreign also in the dubbed version, if that is meaningful. So I asked dubbing professionals several questions, and what they told me was that each film is unique. That there are no rules or regulations on how to approach different varieties or languages. I also realized that there are various constraints and agents, and that the client is, the client decides, that's what they told me, that decisions on languages and on accents are taken by the client. The client can be the producer or the distributor who has offices in each country. Then there are dubbing supervisors. There may be an in-house dubbing supervisor, so a person who's a dubbing supervisor in Italy and then in other countries, in each country, and who supervises the whole dubbing process, translation, adaptation, dubbing in the dubbing studio, and they revise, and who revises the adaptation, making sure that it's faithful to the original intent, to the original creative intent of the filmmakers. So it may be an in-house person, or it may be an international dubbing supervisor. So someone who is appointed by the producer or the distributor and to supervise the dubbing process in different countries. So there are the FRICS countries, for instance, France, Russia, Italy, Germany, and Spain. So there is an international dubbing supervisor who supervises the dubbed version, and they may have meetings, 3-day meetings. It may be in London or in Paris, in which this international dubbing supervisor explains to the dubbing teams from different countries the features of the film in itself, and the features, the characteristics, and the personalities of each character, so that then they can try to, and the most difficult, challenging aspects of a film, and helps them to translate them, to adapt them to their own countries, to localize them. This happens, for instance, with DreamWorks. So this happened with the Madagascar films, for instance. The client gives them directions on how to tackle languages and accents. So they cannot really decide what to do. The client provides, together with the film, they are given, the dialogue list, which contains explanations of specific cultural elements, humor, plays on words, etc. Also the presence of languages or words from foreign languages. Then they also provide them with a key names and phrases file, which is a file which contains the most important words, names, and expressions, which needs to be filled in by the translators, the dubbing team from different countries, to make sure that then they can be reused if needed. And to check, so that the client can check how they approach specific issues. And then they often provide also a creative letter, which is a document which cannot be, none of these documents can be disclosed, obviously, to external people. The creative letter is particularly important because it really contains a description of each character, of the voice actor, the personality, the type of voice they have, and gives directions and tells the dubbing teams how to approach this. Also, whether to use to appoint in the dubbing country maybe a star talent dubber, so celebrity from that country or not. And also, they also do voice tests. So everything is controlled by the US company. Izzo Fiammaizzo, this dubbing director and dialogue writer, she said, we have no freedom. And that's, I know that it's not the same for all types of products, but that's what happens with big majors and films and animated films and products by big majors. However, they may have discussions, they have meetings, they have revisions, so they translate, they adapt the dialogue list, the dialogues, and then they send it to the supervisor, and then the supervisor sends them back with comments. And they may also have, when they go into the dubbing booth and they record the parts, they may also have various versions of the same line, and then the supervisor decides which one is the best one. Another issue which emerged during the conversations was that the important role played by the marketing department. The marketing department of the distributor may decide who dubs a specific character. So they may decide on voice casting. I don't know, there are some red lines. I don't know what's happening. And they decide, so the marketing department may say, we want a star talent dubber. We want this specific person to play the part. And also they may, sorry, I can also hear some noises. Okay, and also voice casting. So for animated films, the protagonists are usually, well, the voice casting, there are tests for 3 people are can send their voice, and then the US company decides who would be the dubbing actor. This happens with all protagonists, and sometimes also with other characters. What they also told me was that they tend to be faithful. They try to be faithful to the original film and to the director's intentions. The main language of the film tends to be standard Italian, while if there is a foreign language, it becomes a foreign language. If there is foreign accented English, it becomes foreign accented Italian. They aim at credible accents, at authenticity, and they're against fake accents. But if they need someone to speak with a foreign accent, then maybe a Spanish accent, then they would try to find a Spanish dubber who knows Italian, so native speakers. Otherwise, they use Italian dubbers who, with the help of dialect coaches and language advisors. Do I have an extra 10 minutes? Am I right? However, if contrived or fake in the original, then it can be contrived in dubbing. So how do characters speak in English? The main characters and heroes in the films I analyzed speak native varieties of English, and in particular, they speak American English, general American, regardless of the setting. So in Ratatouille, which is set in France, the protagonists speak American English, general American. In Rio, which is set in Brazil, the protagonists speak American English. In Ferdinand, which is set in Spain, the protagonist speaks American English. There are very few exceptions out of those 37 films I analyzed. So in Brave, it's set in Scotland, so they speak Scottish English. They have a Scottish accent. But this is all dubbed into standard Italian. In Shrek, Mike Myers, a Canadian actor, was asked to contrive a Scottish accent, a very mild Scottish accent. Then there is Puss in Boots, who is a Spanish accented speaker, but Puss in Boots was a secondary character in the Shrek films. And in Despicable Me and Hotel Transylvania, the protagonists speak Eastern European accented English, contrived, mock, humorous Eastern European accented English. And in Coco, a slight Spanish accented English, because we are in Spain. Do characters speak British English? And what type of characters speak British English? They're villains, yes, many of them are villains. But characters some characters are also refined, aristocratic, or rich. Characters speaking RP, receive pronunciation are British symbols. So we have the Shakespeare statue and the Queen in Cars. But they may also be ambiguous characters or lovable rogues or criminals. For instance, in Sing, characters who have Cockney accent, they are this type of character. And we find several examples. And these, in dubbing, they all neutralize. We don't get that variety when we hear them in Italian. Other varieties of American English, which are also used for comic purposes and for stereotypes, are Southern American English, to convey, to create simple, naive, and rustic characters. For instance, think of Tom Mater in Cars. He's a rustic and naive and comic character, and he speaks Southern American English. He has a marked accent and also uses non-standard grammar. African American vernacular English is also used for lazy, funny sidekicks, comic characters, or characters who have a dubious behavior. Donkey in Shrek, Moto in Madagascar, Dr. Nefario in Despicable Me, Donnie's father in Sing, who's a thief. Foreign accented English is used to establish setting, audio postcarding, and for characterization and contrast. Do I have 5 extra minutes? Am I right? So foreign accented English to provide characterization and contrast. Main characters speak American English, and then we have someone who speaks with a French accent, then this is contrast. And humor, to provide humor. A foreign accent often provides humor. And there are stereotypes of the French, of the Spanish, Mexican, Italian American, German, Russian, all of them. And in dubbing, they are translated. Dubbing strategies for native varieties, so American English, British English, Australian English, there is neutralization. We lose them in dubbing because they speak standard Italian. Whereas for Spanish and non-native varieties, the main strategy is characterization or hyper-characterization, as Parini stated, hyper-characterization. So there is either preservation of the linguistic identity, if they're foreign, the ethnic identity of Spanish or Latin American characters, but also other foreign characters, is conveyed and often emphasized if the function of the Spanish accented English is to provide characterization as contrast and humor. If there are stereotypes, then usually this is emphasized. And this happens with Banderas in Shrek, with Puss in Boots. The client even says, that they want more accent. On the other hand, there is reduction or neutralization of the foreign accent if the function of the foreign accented English is that of establishing the setting, telling us where we are, or if the function is not, if the film is not a comic film, humorous film, for instance, with Coco, reduction of the foreign accent, and to avoid caricature or parody. And this happened in Ratatouille. For instance, in Ratatouille, in the original film, there was a French accent and some French words, and the characters were definitely caricatures. And they were on the other hand, this was neutralized in the dubbed version. But each film is different, and various factors affect choices. And for instance, in Shrek, we have native varieties, American and British. They're not conveyed in dubbing. Non-standard varieties, Donkey, is not conveyed in dubbing. Ethnolegs and foreign accented English, Puss in Boots and the Three Little Pigs with a German accent, Monsieur Hood in French, these are conveyed. So they speak with the French, Spanish, German accent in the dubbed version. In two of the Shrek films, Banderas dubs himself, and there is hypercharacterization. So the emphasis on the Spanishness. Emphasis means that they use, the accent is marked in the dubbed version, and they use even more Spanish words. And Vairano, who was the dubbing director of the Shrek films, told me that while they were doing it, the client said, more Spanish, more Spanish. Ask Banderas to sound more Spanish. And Banderas said, well, how can I sound more Spanish than I really am? But they wanted more. And this was the client's request for Puss in Boots, for instance. Important to use as much Spanish in the Puss dialogue as possible. Okay to substitute with another more well-known Spanish terms or put Spanish in other dialogues. So the strategy of compensation. Use either the same Spanish words or other Spanish words, as long as you think that your audience would understand them. So you need to think of what your audience will understand, and maybe use more. With Italian Americans, with these films, Shark Tale, Zootopia, and Atlantis, they speak Italian American, stereotyped Italian American with an Italian accent in the original version, and they use Sicilian in Italian. In Mr. Peabody and Sherman, they speak French accented English in the original, and with French words and French accented Italian in the dubbed version. In Florence, when they're in Florence, they speak Italian accented and a dialect in the dubbed version. I think, and in the Madagascar film, they also have several the members of the Circus Saragossa who speak with the Russian accent, with Russian words, and who are foreign. They are. This is also conveyed in the dub version. I'll just go to Ratatouille, and then I'll get to my conclusions. I'm aware of time. In Ratatouille, in the original version, they speak with a French, marked French accent and French pronunciation. And in the Italian version, the dubbing team decided to avoid that in order to avoid stereotypes and parody. So they decided to use standard Italian. And I'll get to my conclusions because I think it's time to wrap up. So what happens to varieties of English? Native varieties of English are neutralized. Dubbing strategies for foreign accented English, there is a tendency to use foreign accented Italian and use foreign words. However, Spanish accented Italian, French accented Italian is avoided in some cases when the function is to provide the setting and when they want to avoid caricatures. So for Ratatouille and Coco, in Italian, they don't speak, characters don't speak with a Spanish or French accent. They speak standard Italian with some French or Spanish words, but standard Italian. Dubbing strategies are affected by various factors, the client's request, the marketing department, availability of native speakers, or the presence of star talent dubbers. And Italian dubbing professionals try to make their actors sound authentic. The study confirms that there is homogenization as far as native varieties are concerned. Adding an English accent is used only in some cases for famous people, or if they want the character to be extremely comical, or if there is contrast. So in planes, for instance, there are characters from their planes from different nationalities, different countries. And in that case, you needed to hear that one of them was British. So they gave him an English accent. But otherwise, usually there is neutralization. Italian-American tends to be dubbed into Sicilian. But other regiolegs are also used. But regiolegs tend to be avoided unless in some cases, for instance, the creative dubbing of Romeo and Juliet, for instance, and in Zootropolis, there are some cases. Foreign accent in English or non-native varieties are represented through stereotypes, also in the dubbed version, often through hypercharacterization. When the function is humor. There are stereotypes also in Italian dubbing, except for Ratatouille and Coco. And Gru is not maintained, the foreign accent of Gru is not maintained in Despicable Me 2 because the client wanted a star talent dubber. Foreign languages, if there is a foreign language, it is retained. So if there are lines in a foreign language, they are retained in the dubbed version. And if the foreign language is Italian, they either use another language, Spanish, or a dialect. However, American companies control the final product. So they control everything, every single step of the dubbing process. However, Italian dubbing professionals and dubbing professionals elsewhere, I think, can be creative and can discuss with their international dubbing supervisor, with the client. And animation is definitely more, there is more freedom and creativity in the way language variation is tackled. And I would say that I'm done, and sorry for those 2-3 minutes.
Thanks, Dr.
Thank you.
For your wonderful, highly interesting and illuminating speech about recreating language identities in animated films. An interesting fact is that a lot of animated films you talked about have been dubbed into Chinese as well. So the issues such as multilingualism, language varieties, and dubbis are also challenges we are facing in dubbing them into Chinese. And from your talk, I see that there are a lot of similarities between Italian dubbers and Chinese dubbers, and there are also a great differences, great amount of differences between them. I think that maybe in the future, a comparative study between Chinese versions and Italian versions will reveal how identities are recreated in different contexts.
Yes, I completely agree with you, and that's something which, the idea of my book was really to provide a kind of, an example, and then see what happens in other countries. And I was talking, while I was preparing the talk, I was talking to Juan. Thank you, Juan. And I was asking her, can you check how they speak in Ratatouille or in other films? Because we can compare what happens in all languages and countries, and whether the same stereotypes are conveyed or not, and what strategies there are. And we could really do a comparative case study on films, on animated films. Yes, thank you very much. And also, you use standard. Everything is standardized. I think everything is neutralized in Chinese, right?
Most of the times, but it's also quite different because in China, actually, a lot of Hollywood studio does not have the final say, because the dubbing in China are by state-owned film studios, and Hollywood studios such as DreamWorks, China is the exception for them. So the dubbing studios have maybe more free